up, but 1 second. I'm just getting my coffee.
Yep.
Okay. Still loading. Oh, but 1 second. I'm just getting my coffee.
Yep. Okay, so we are good to go.
No? My thing is still loading, but we can just record on your side then when this is
yes.
we
started the live streaming also. Okay, so thank you so much everyone for joining in. So it's 8:33. We got 3 minutes late, but we will finish on time. So I'm Jatin. I'm one of the co-founder of eChai network. We host engaging startup meetups and enable one-on-one video calls where we enable founders to network with each other. It's an interesting journey for us. This is the 12th year for us, and for a very, very long period, we remained in one city. But last 1 year was very incredible, where we were able to expand into 25 global cities, where physically we used to host a lot of meetups and bring a lot of founders together. And we've started this eChai with Pioneers series, where we invite iconic entrepreneurial leaders to come and share their experiences and interact with the founders. So today we have Mada from Branch. First of all, thank you so much, Mada, for accepting the invite.
Oh, thanks for having me. So excited to be here today.
It's pretty early morning at your time, so I really appreciate you taking the extra effort to join us.
It's my second meeting of the day, so.
Awesome. So it's a video podcast, so we'll take some live questions also. So Mada, if you can briefly tell us about your early days. You mentioned you were born in Romania, so how were those early days for you?
Yeah, I was born in a small town in Romania during communism. It's called Bacău. It's in Moldavia, which is a part of Romania close to the country Moldavia. And it was interesting. I was pretty nerdy. I was very good at math, and I used to spend all my weekends studying to go to math contests, which I found very fun, especially the geometry part of math.
Yeah.
And my parents, my mom is definitely my role model. She, when communism fell, she really reinvented herself and learned how to be an investment analyst, and then join a British fund and moved us to Bucharest, which is the capital, when I was halfway through high school. And kind of took us from poverty. So I grew up not having enough money for food and wondering if we were going to have food, to, as communism fell, really moving into middle class, which so by the time I left Romania, we were pretty solid middle class. And I saw that transition, and from us not having money to buy clothes to actually having a stable income. And she was, I looked at her as a role model, and one of her dreams was for me to go and study abroad. So she read that if you're good at math and if you have all these awards, you can get a full scholarship to in the United States. So I applied to a lot of schools and ended up at Cornell studying computer engineering. That's my coming to the States story.
Awesome. And Mada, how did you get into startup world? That was 2005 you finished in Cornell, and how did you get into startups?
It took some time. I didn't actually, when I left Cornell, I wanted to work for a really big company. I had I think growing up in communism, you don't have foreign companies and you think these big corporations are really cool. So after I left Cornell, I ended up working as a software developer for Siemens Medical, which was interesting. I learned a lot. I don't think I have a strong affinity to the medical field. I really admire it, but I don't have a passion there. So my visa didn't go through. I had a bunch of visa issues, and then I ended up at Stanford doing a master's in MSNE. And that's when, Stanford has this thing called the design school, where you take classes and it's very experiential. And it was very different than my engineering classes at Cornell that were incredibly hardcore. And I felt it was creative, and we did a lot of consulting projects for startups around here. And that's how I first discovered startups. And one of my professors was this guy, Michael Deering, who's also an investor. He has a fund called Harrison Meadow. And I remember walking after class one time with him to his car, helping him take some things from one of our classes. And I was like, oh, all these startups are so cool. Like, I don't think I could ever start a company. And then he like stopped and put the box down and like looked at me, and he was like, okay, like you're really smart and you're like at the top university and you do so well in all your projects. Like if you don't, like who do you think will? I was like, oh, no one ever like told me anything like that. No, I think, Cornell was a really big university, and like my professors, I was in classes with 400 or 500 people, and I never had the relationship with a professor that I felt believed in me. And this was the first time that someone that wasn't my mom, that I really admired, told me that they felt I could do something extraordinary. And that was the moment I was like, okay, one day I'm going to start a company. And it took me some time. I went into consulting again because of eChai issues, and then worked for a startup. Then went to business school. But I did go to business school with this idea that I was going to find a founding team and we were going to start something. So I looked around, and my co-founders were like pretty impressive. So I actually reached out to them and I was like, what are you working on? Can I help?
So that was for the Kindred Prints or for the branch?
That was actually before Kindred Prints. Our first company was called Paw Print Labs, and it was a Fitbit for dogs. It's hard to find. We don't talk about it as much, but Alex, our CEO, had this idea of doing this. And actually the same professors I had taken the class 7 years earlier in MSNE were still teaching a class at the school called Launchpad. So I convinced Alex so Alex was like, I'm thinking of doing this like Fitbit for dogs. And I was like, I'm your perfect co-founder. I love dogs. I'm a designer. I can like build websites. You can build all the hardcore stuff. And then Mike, our COO, he had built a lot of consumer products. He worked for 3M. He had a bunch of patents. And we're like, oh, he can actually build the thing. So we were like the perfect team for Fitbit for dogs. But, it's a crowded market. It's very small. So the summer between first and second year, we were like, what should we do? This is not really working. So we came up with the Kindred Prints idea.
That team. Was where all of you were together in Stanford.
Yeah, all of us, except Dimitri, who joined, I guess, I don't know, like almost a year later. He came from we had already raised a pre-seed, and our investors introduced us.
So Mada, you were mentioning about you were working on this idea on dogs, and then you went on to start Kindred Prints. So what was that precise point where you thought, okay, this dogs business might not be a big business, and let's jump into Kindred Prints?
Yeah, it was really the dog. I think it was, we were going to, we were going to all these like dog parks and asking people if they would buy this Fitbit for dogs. And a lot of people said no. And we were in Palo Alto where like people have a lot of money and like, and it just kind of felt, the more we thought about it, the more it felt like this wasn't a mass market product. And then it was very competitive. There was a competitor that launched and raised a bunch of money. They ended up selling later. The product is still on the market. But like ultimately I had a dog but I didn't have a lot of money. I was a student. So I was like, if I had this money, would I actually buy this device? And I was like, probably not. I would probably actually spend that money on like treats and vet visits and stuff. And I would only buy that if I had a lot of disposable income. So then that market would be very small. Mm-hmm. Those are only targets.
And with Kindred Print, what was the initial idea that you thought, okay, this is going to become big?
Yeah, we were sitting in a room like business school students do, trying to be like, what can we work on? And we had this idea that we love taking photos, and we were on our iPhone, but our parents and grandparents didn't really have an iPhone. They didn't like receive photos that way, and they were still kind of behind. and they really preferred printed stuff. So we said, well, what if we could have a service that allowed you to easily print stuff from your phone and send it to your family and friends and loved ones. I mean, that was the initial idea. What we found out later was that our market was actually moms with their first child between 0 and 3, and teenagers in long distance relationships. So now people sending stuff to their grandparents. But that was our initial idea. Then we did that we built an app with both iOS and Android that allowed you to do that in this like little booklet that was cheap. We did a lot. I mean, we sold probably, we worked on this for like maybe 9 months, almost a year, right?
So
Well, 9 months of being live. And we sold about 15,000 books.
Okay, you raised funds for that, or that was a bootstrap?
Yeah, we did. Well, most of the money that we raised for that, we ended up using for Branch. The first 50K, which was a convertible note, I spent it all on ads. And on Facebook to acquire users and figure out if this was a sustainable business or not. And then we realized it wasn't really.
Okay. And what led to the foundation of Branch?
Yeah, so I think it really came, it was very different. We didn't sit in a room and think about something. Well, kind of. Like one Sunday, I think I went to Alex's place and we were like, well, we're really struggling with this one issue. What if we could build a solution for that? But it really came from a very strong pain that we felt as developers. We were trying to like promote our app, and we found it very hard to track how people came to our app. And we wanted to build like custom experiences. So as I said earlier, we had like teenagers and moms as our 2 core audiences, and they behave very differently. Moms bought a lot of books at once. Versus teenagers were very likely to share if you gave them something free. So I wanted to build a different experience if someone came from like the mom campaign or someone came from like, the teenager campaign. And I found there was no way when someone installed the app to know where they came from. There was no way to pass the parameter to install. So like, what if we could do that? What if we could do this idea of not just deep linking, but deferred deep linking, where you can click on a link and someone installs the app, and then you know where they came from a user. And if they came from a user, you know what users they came from. If they came from like an ad campaign, you know exactly what ad campaign. And you can have a lot of parameters that you can help them onboard and customize the app experience. But it also helps you track what works and what doesn't. That's kind of how the idea came. I remember when we came up with this idea, we're like, we really want this. First, we were trying to find a solution for ourselves, and there weren't. I mean, we had some competitors in the early days, but we didn't find them. We didn't know they existed until much later after we had started Branch.
So when this idea came, Mada, so were all 4 of you totally in for that, or was there a resistance from any one of you or from investors that you had exited already?
Yeah, I mean, there was an investor that didn't like the idea, but he was actually an investor in one of our competitors, we found out later, and he tried to push us to not do this. I think initially it was Alex and I on a Sunday, and then we came back on Monday, and then Dimitri and Mike, who are our other co-founders, were like, oh, we're doing this. And they're like, what? But then we convinced them. And then our investors who actually raised money from Pair Ventures, they were actually very supportive. But we had this one advisor who said that we shouldn't do this, that it's a bad market. And I think it was a conflict of interest for him because he had invested in one of our competitors. So I think for him, if we were going this direction, it would be, our competitor ended up not adapting to the changes, and we ended up taking over their customers. So, we prevailed in the end, but yeah.
Awesome. So you have, in a way, pioneered the community-driven marketing strategy. So what was those initial things you did to get Branch visibility within the community?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I would say that there's no like new ideas. The idea about building a community came, Greylock Ventures invested a little bit in our Series A, like very small check. And we kept in touch with them, and they had this, growth advisor in residence. So Mike and I met, and we're like, we asked him, like, what advice does he have? And he's like, well, you should find something that you tie to, and then build a brand around it, and then build everything, own it when it comes to events, content, etc. So we on the ride back from Greylock to our office, Mike and I were like, "What is the thing?" And we're like, "I think it's mobile growth." And we're like, "Okay, let's like start a meetup. Let's call it Mobile Growth Hackers SF." And I was driving, and Mike, while I was driving, went to meetup.com and started like the meetup group. And then I was like, "Okay, we're just gonna do an event," and I just started an event. I'm like, we'll see what happens. And I remember calling pizza places because we hadn't raised a lot of money. So we were like, okay, who has 2 for 1? So we called like 7 pizza places, and one of them had 2 for 1. And we got the pizza. We went to like a grocery store and bought the beer. It was very like, grassroots. And then I invited all my friends. I tried to convince everyone I knew to come. We got some good speakers. And then a lot of people came and were like, wow, people, we have 100 people. I can't believe we actually managed to do this. And people seem interested and now know about Branch. And, the relationships with the speakers were cool. Like some of those original speakers we got at our first few meetups were like people from Pinterest and Robinhood, and those became some of our first really big customers. So we're like, oh, I think we're onto something. Like this works. But to be fair, we did listen. We don't just have a community. We also do these mobile growth handbooks. That's one of our best pieces of content. We do a mobile growth newsletter. We do a lot of things. We really, that was probably, it's funny because we met that guy and we're like, do you remember, all the stuff we did was because of your advice. And he didn't even remember us. He didn't remember giving us the advice. He's like, really? Oh, I was just like kind of saying that, wow, you really executed. So yeah, I think it's all about the execution and just working hard. And I think that's kind of how we did it. So
correct. So Mada, there are a lot of companies who are trying to use community to grow their business now, but sometimes conflict comes, whether something which is good for the community and for an individual brand. So in your case, what would you advise that you did, or what would you advise to someone who's trying to build a community-driven marketing for their businesses?
I think it's really important that you don't like just do it for your business. I know this is like a weird thing, but I actually feel like so many people are like, oh, this is my company's name and I'm building community around my company. And, like maybe that's totally fine if you're like really big, but when you're small, people are not interested. And I think people sometimes just think of themselves and they're so centered on their brand that they don't really think about what do other people care about? Like what do they want to hear? And they're too self-serving, right? So I think the way you have to think about building community is like I was doing a podcast last night with a Jay who used to be the CTO of Gojek. And he had this really great analogy. He said, I really like tomatoes. And he's like, when you grow your tomato plant, you put the seeds. And when do you get tomatoes? You get tomatoes a lot later. And I think the way you invest in community needs to be very similar. You put the seeds, you do a lot of work, you don't get anything in return. But years later, you start getting results. It's the same thing with SEO, where you do a lot of content, you don't get stuff right away, but then over time. So I think, as a marketer, I think that's probably been one of the best things I've done. I've had faith in certain things and measured, but we gave it time. And there were definitely times where my co-founders were like, I don't think we should do these meetups anymore. I don't think it works. We're not getting anything out of it. But then eventually we started actually like being able to measure the influence on our deals, and it was like huge. So it's like, it took us a long time to get there. But yeah, so I think don't wait. I think understand it's going to take time, and don't be too self-serving. Those are the 2 biggest pieces of advice to community.
Correct. Mada, Branch has a very exponential growth in the beginning with, and it has continued. So community thing you mentioned, according to you, what were those 1 or 2 critical factors that worked for you? That's why you were able to get that exponential?
I mean, we had product market fit, which it's magical. It really is. Like, one of my co-founders, when he got married, he said, "Oh, when I met my fiance, my wife, I felt the same magic I felt as that we felt with Branch, because branches are like fourth. Even with Kinder Prince, we had two different ideas. So branches are fourth idea. So we tried a bunch of stuff together, and I think many founders start with the first thing, and then they become so attached to the idea that they have find it very hard to pivot. And I've invested a bunch. I advise startups, and I see this a lot. And even looking back, I don't know if I was so attached to the dog thing and so attached to the kinder thing. And we all were. Like when we decided, I mean, Alex was like, "This is really not working, guys. I don't think this is going to be a big business." And we're like, "No." But even then, he was like, "But maybe I can like buy it from you and I'll just do it on the weekend." Like even someone as Alex is probably the least emotional and the most like very well thought out person, but even someone like him couldn't let go of this business, right? So I think that's like the problem that so many founders have. We ended up selling it to someone else, thank God. We didn't do it on weekends because it was not a good business. But I think so many founders get so attached to their idea that they have a very hard time like letting go, and then they go so deep into something that's never going to be that big, and then they feel trapped. I see this. I have a lot of founder friends, and in the early days they can like go and do something else, and then like 7 years in they're like, "Oh, this is never going to be big, but I feel so trapped because I raised a bunch of money." And so the earlier you can like figure out the decision, so I think that was a big thing. And then I think we worked really hard. Like, I think if you go and you read all the Glassdoor reviews on Branch, and there's positive and negative, but they all say that like there is no, they all say that we work hard, maybe too hard sometimes.
Yes.
And I think that this was our lives. We made a lot of sacrifices to make this happen.
Awesome.
Um,
So you have four co-founders. So how did you divide the roles, or it organically came into the personalities? What was those decisions initially, that who will take care of what?
yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. If you look at like one of the main reasons companies that have product market fit fail, it's usually the founders don't get along. And I think one of the main reasons founders don't get along is because they're too similar.
Mhm.
We are not similar at all. Sometimes people are like, how are you guys like, how do you guys work? How are you guys still together after like, I guess 8 years now? Because you're so weird and different. And I actually think that was our strength. We are very different. Alex is very strategic, very technical. Um, Mike is very operational. He can get like anything, he give him a project and he'll make sure it gets done well. I'm very much idea oriented. I care about people. I'm creative. I love promoting stuff. And Dimitri is just very, very technical and very smart. He's probably the smartest out of all of us. And he really likes building stuff. So I think, it was very clear in the beginning that Alex and Dimitri would do technical, and Mike and I would do kind of like the business. But even in the business side, in many cases, I will have an idea and I will do something, and then Mike will make sure it gets done really well. And we're very complementary in that. Like I have a lot of initiative, and I've learned to temper my initiative, so I have less things than Mike. And I've also learned to like be a better executor. And Mike has a lot more initiative. Like we've become more similar to each other after working together for so long. But we still are very like, I really like doing marketing and I really like doing culture stuff. And I like doing public speaking and being the face of Branch. And my co-founders don't really like that much.
Okay.
And Alex really, really likes doing engineering and strategy, and we all trust him with that. And Mike is the executor. Like it's just, it is very like fitting to our personalities. So we don't butt heads very much. We trust each other because we all think that the other is better at something that they own than they are. So I think that has been really cool, actually.
Correct. And you Branch has very brand name investors, Greylock, Founders Fund, Playground Ventures. So how did it got started? Like a big name came and then others approached you, or you have actively started approaching these brand name investors?
Well, I mean, we've raised a lot of rounds,
Yep.
so we came with different rounds. The first one, NEA, I think, it was funny when we raised our seed. We had raised a pre-seed from Benjamin MR for Payer Ventures, but that was for Kindred.
Mm-hmm.
And when we told them we're switching to Branch, they said, cool. So we actually had some money at the beginning. So we didn't raise like right away for Branch. We started, and we actually could pay ourselves salaries after we graduated from what we had raised from. We had raised, I think, 250K after the convertible note, so 300 total from them. And we just used that to like live that somewhere. And we said, okay, we're going to give it 6 months. So we didn't really start fundraising. I was trying to do an event at a VC. So I reached out to them saying, this is what we do. Can we come and like do something? And the guy was like, oh, this is so cool. I want you to talk to my partner. We met with him, and the guy is like, okay, I want to invest 2 million in you. And we're like, what? Really? You just met us. And we're like, maybe we should fundraise now. So then we started like asking other people for invites, and we started going first just through like angels. So we're like, oh, we just want to be an angel around. And then like somehow we met this guy, Ben Narrison, and he's like, no, I think I want you to meet the NEA guy. So he's like, when he realized the mission we were trying to do, he like dropped his coffee, got Alex in the car. We were supposed to meet with some other investors, and Alex wasn't answering anything. And we're like, I remember texting him, and I'm like, are you alive? And he's like, yes. Like, okay. And then he's like, okay, NEA really wants to invest in us. And then we had other companies. We had like a lot of others, like Greylock and a bunch of others. But we had really committed to NEA. So then the other ones just added a little bit to the round, but NEA was the main investor. And they really loved us, so they led the A. We didn't even shop it around. And then Founders Fund and others came later on, and the B and the C. But yeah, it was a very interesting, experience. It really felt like during that seed that we were the hottest girl at the ball. And I think that's kind of how it goes with seeds and A's. People get, when they hear that you're a cool company, they get very excited.
Correct.
It was harder to raise the later rounds, I don't think. And I think it's the same for everyone. I think it's, unless you're like Facebook or Airbnb. But yeah, I think people really believed in our mission. Our mission, by the way, is to make the mobile ecosystem more open through linking and other forms of discovery, and really like break down some of the barriers that the platforms are putting on the mobile ecosystem. We felt that it was incredibly hard to grow an app, and these platforms have so much power. And the more we can actually, level the field and give more opportunities for mobile companies to be discovered, to take people to content, to not depend so much on just promotion by the brands. I think that's our long-term mission.
Correct. And Mada, when we read the story about Branch, the moment you pivoted, everything has gone smoothly. So were there any moments in your journey where things got a little difficult? You have to really put in a little more extra effort to get it right. Any experiences you can share?
I mean,
so
history is written by the winners.
Yes.
But people don't talk about the struggles. There's a lot of struggles. I mean, there's a lot of changes. We live we exist in a ecosystem that is owned by these giant empires. And when they make a change, like, the IDFA changes now, the world shudders for all of us, and we have to like adapt and change and be there. And I think one of the things that we've done really well is that adaptation. I think the way we've adapted when Apple changed from URI schemes to universal links, and Google followed suit with app links. It was a big change, and it was very stressful, but like it allowed us to actually like get a foothold in the market. And we adapted, and our technology works so much better than our competitors on the side. I think it was like Yozio and Tapstream. And that's when they died, actually, because we adapted and they didn't. And I think we're seeing a similar something very similar happening right now in the market with the IDFA changes, and we'll see what happens.
Correct.
But there's a lot of change in the market, and the mobile industry is probably the fastest moving market that there is right now. And I wouldn't say it's smooth sailing. I would say that we've been doing well and growing, but it's not like there's a lot of work behind the scenes to do that.
Correct. And there is a lot of focus by Branch on creating a good company culture. So in your case, in the early days, apart from all four of you, how did you get to that middle management team and then enable them to become leaders themselves? Any experiences you can share on that?
I mean, it's really hard. I would say the hardest thing that I think a lot of startups face when it comes to people, and I think we were an example of that, is you bring in some amazing people and they're really cool, and then you basically start growing, and then instead of like thinking, hey, should I hire managers, you just promote those people, and maybe before they're ready. So you start having a lot of inexperienced managers, and even the founders themselves are usually not the best. Like, I would say I'm an okay manager now. I was a terrible manager 5 years ago. I had never managed people. No one trained me. I had so much on my plate individually that I had no time to focus on people I was managing. I had no time to learn. Like, I read a lot these days on how to be a better manager, how to be a better leader. I didn't have any time then. And I think it's almost like the early employees really like have it hard. They work really hard in many cases. I mean, there's companies with more experienced founders, but a lot of companies have founders like our age, in their like late 20s, early 30s, who are just not like the best. They're still learning. So, we did a lot in the past few years, and I think we're much better. We do a lot of management training. We use a company called Life Labs. They're really awesome. I learned a lot from their modules. We do a lot of like our own internal training. We suggest books, and we have book clubs. We give a lot of feedback. We do these 360 feedback loops that I think have helped a lot us grow and others grow. But I would say that we've only started doing these things maybe 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So first like 2.5 years of Branch, there wasn't much. We just didn't have the time, we didn't have the resources, and it was hard. But I'm very grateful for our early employees, honestly. The ones that are here and the ones that left, they're a lot of Branch wouldn't be here without them, and I think they had it harder than people now. We were still figuring out everything.
And you're an investment partner at X Factor Ventures. So how did get started?
Yeah, so X Factor is like, I actually got invited by one of my friends, Jess, who's the CEO of Dinero, and the way X Factor works, they have a fund, and it's spun out of a bigger fund, but it's basically just like, I think we're like 22 female founders.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same as like any fund. We have LPs and we're just the partners. So we split profits, but you get to lead an investment the same way you would. You have to get like buy-in from the team. So it's a really cool experience. I have done only 2 investments as part of X Factor. I have led 2 investments. One in Dev, which is like a developer community. I love communities, and then one in an AR app called Zero AR. And I'm obsessed with AR. I think it's going to be the next big thing. I think it's going to change our world the same way the iPhone did. And so yeah, those are my 2 investments. I'm also a Sequoia Scout, where that's a lot easier. You just kind of like, Sequoia gives you money and then you invest on your own, but you are actually considered the investor. So I've done a few investments there. I invest mostly in women. I think I've done 13 investments so far, and only one has been a dude.
So it's an interesting phrase. You you are operator, and then there is a part investment. So is there a conflict you face with the thought process that as a operator founder you think in a certain way, and as an investor you evaluate the same thing in a different way? Anything that comes across?
I mean, I invest in very early stage startups. I'm not, and I do small checks, except X Factor, which is like a bigger check size. And but there I feel like I've had a lot of help from the rest of the team.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, there's this idea that we have a bunch of female founder friends, and then we all invest in each other, and it kind of feels we're building this little mafia of support and try to bring new people in and try to build support networks. I feel like the most conflict I feel is actually being a friend to some of these women and being an investor,
Mhm.
because in many cases, like sometimes as an investor, I don't agree with some of their decisions, and as a friend, I want to support them no matter what. So it has been interesting. I think this idea of like being an operator, I actually think in general the best investors were operators before. I think I can give a lot of advice and provide value, especially on the marketing side, and I don't think there's a conflict anyway. I mean, the
Okay.
companies are small, and I think I can provide. I don't invest unless it's a close friend, and I've done this a couple of times. And those are like my own checks. I've never invested like Sequoia or X Factor in close friends. But otherwise, I feel like I usually can bring a lot of value to the company. And I don't invest, I've never invested in Bitcoin, for example, because I
Okay.
don't feel I understand Bitcoin well enough. So I usually invest in mobile and B2B, like
Okay.
SaaS. I think those are the two areas. And you'll see most of the what I've invested in has been in those areas.
There is a question on YouTube for you. So, in the early days of Branch, what were those challenges? And now, after 6 years, 7 years, what has changed? What are the challenges now?
Well, in the early days, all the challenges were around product. Now, most of the challenges are around people. I mean, there's also product challenges and market changes. The market changes challenges have not changed. They've stayed the same. They're always going to be there. But I do think sometimes people don't realize that above a certain size, literally above like 30 people, as a founder, most of what you deal with is like people issues. Um, and in the early days, you think it's always going to be product and you want to build a product, but to build a product, you have to build a team in doing that. And, I think we were very lucky that we had 4 founders, because in many cases, Mike and I deal more with the people aspects of the business, and we love doing it. It's like, it's not like I lead marketing as my official job, but I do a lot of culture stuff and I love it. And same with Mike, is actually and lead sales, but he also does a lot of people stuff. And so then Alex loves doing product, and he gets to really focus on product, and he helps with the people stuff, but like it's not his main focus. What I see with solo founders is they really struggle. They struggle because they don't have a partner who can help with the people issues, so they can focus on the product stuff.
Correct.
So I do think, like, especially for first time founders, it's very hard to be alone. I don't know if I could do it. And looking at my friends who do it, I have a lot of admiration, but I can see how hard it is. But yeah, I think that would be the biggest like type of change I see.
Yep. And you briefly mentioned that you started reading more. So any specific things you did so that consciously you get better at something so that you can become a better leader managing a large corporation?
Yeah, I mean, I read a lot of books on culture. So we did the whole culture revamp, trying to understand what one of the things that I'm very proud of is we had our values early on, but we evolved them over time. And defining what makes culture, how to think about culture. I read a lot around this. I read, I think, like 6 or 7 books, and I came up with a bunch of changes and a bunch of things to do better. I talked to early people at Facebook, Amazon, Google, all these companies.
Mhm.
So I felt like when I was trying to like rethink what makes Branch, what is Branch, how do we measure ourselves, I did a lot of research on that. I think when being a manager, I definitely, the 2 things I did that I think were best. One, I did the 360 with a coach, and it was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do.
Mhm.
She interviewed, I think, 12 people, and she did 1 hour interviews, and it was someone I invested in, and my mom, and all my direct reports, and my co-founders. It was very different facets of my life.
Correct.
And she got people to give very harsh feedback, and she made me like read all the feedback and write it all down.
Mm-hmm.
It sticks with me, and it's very hard. I mean, it's so much critical feedback. But I think it was probably the thing that made me, while it was very hard in the moment, I think feedback is a gift, and I think I became a lot better hearing those things. And it was just probably one of the best things I've ever done. And then I also read a lot, and pairing reading and how to do things better to knowing what your like weaknesses are, and your some I knew and some I didn't. It can really help you grow. So it's been an interesting challenge to grow into a better leader. And I think the last thing was having a group of friends who are all founders and CEOs, and talking and having a support group in a way. I think that has been maybe the third thing that helped.
Awesome. Last 15 minutes of the discussions, we'll try to do more of a rapid fire. So you mentioned about books. We could see some books in the screen. If you were to recommend one book to early stage startup founders, what that book would be?
I mean, it's hard. I think it just depends. I think one book that I really, really liked recently was The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. I think the reason it's good for early stage startups is because it really talks about how you should frame your mission and why that's important and how to inspire others. It's a very foundational book, I think. But if you are looking for a culture, what you do is who you are, or something like that. The Ben Horowitz book, I think that was also very good. But that's more like, maybe that's a little bit later, once you actually have a team and you're building culture.
Mada, in your profile, it was mentioned that you love watching sci-fi shows. Which is that one show that you absolutely love?
Star Trek. I've watched Star Trek I've watched Next Generation 4 times, the entire season.
Wow.
And I've watched them all. Maybe not the original ones, but yeah, I really like Star Trek. But I've seen probably the majority of sci-fi shows on TV.
Okay. And Mada, if you were not doing Branch, like what else you could have been doing?
There's a few different answers. If I didn't start Branch, I would probably be a PM or product marketer at like Facebook or Google or something. That's probably what I would have done after business school. I don't think that that's what I would have loved doing, but that's, just being honest. What I probably will do after Branch is probably a mixture of investing, and I want to write a book. I have this idea around monsters, and the monsters you have to deal with to build the company. And I want to write like an animated book about these startup monsters and build a brand around it. I want to find a way to bridge my creativity and my like love for painting and drawing with all the business stuff I've learned. And I feel like for the past few years, I almost shut my creative side of my brain off. And I want to find a way that I can like bring the creativity to a very hard problem.
And Mada, you lead multiple functions and has responsibility for doing a lot of things. Which is one particular activity you absolutely enjoy the most?
I really do enjoy doing things like this, like public speaking. I used to say that like there's nothing cooler than being on a big stage and talking about something and getting feedback. And so now, I mean, during COVID, I do things like this. I have my own podcast called How I Grew This, where I interview people who have driven growth in small and large companies. And I really enjoy doing the podcast too. So, yeah.
And Mada, in a way, you inspire us. Who inspires you?
I mean, I think in general, like strong women. I'm really excited about Biden's VP pick, Kamala Harris, who was in Senator from California.
Yep.
I when I was learning how to be a better marketing leader, there was this woman, Megan Eisenberg, who mentored me, and I think like she inspired me. My mom has always inspired me. So my founder friends who have really cool companies. So yeah.
So you are a community leader. You mentioned about public speaking. So there are a lot of people who aspire to be community managers, either as a profession or to enable whatever their main job is. What would you recommend them? Like, these are the top 3 things. If you do, there are very high chances you'll become successful at that.
I think it's just all about relationship building, and I think building this idea, like, how do you build good relationships? I don't know if I am a community leader. I have been at some point in time. Maybe I am at Branch. I think just being open, asking questions, learning how to just make people feel comfortable and listening more. I think those are things. I
And
don't know if there's like if there's a secret to become a community leader.
And what next for Branch now? Like, after you raised more than $300 million, what is that big thing that you briefly mentioned about it? What is the big thing that?
Yeah, I can't really talk about it, but it really is around discovery and helping your app be discovered. And I think it's going to be really cool. Been working on something for a while. We're in beta now in a lot of places, and this just idea that you don't have to just depend on Facebook and Google and Apple to get your app discovered, but if you have good content in your app, it will be discovered by users.
Correct.
We have some cool stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to it. And you mentioned about it, there was a professor who asked you that if not you becoming entrepreneur, who else would be? And from that point in time, and then being a co-founder of a fastest growing unicorns in Silicon Valley, what has changed in your, like, how do you sink in with that moment?
No, I mean it doesn't feel like so much has changed. I feel like I'm still the same person. It's funny. I sent him every few years, or a year or so, I check in with him and I tell him, hey, I wouldn't be here if you hadn't told me that. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I just live my life. I don't feel like how much money you raise. I don't think it's something you necessarily need to celebrate. And this unicorn thing, Branch is a company, and I'm doing things that I love. I love marketing and I love culture stuff. And I just feel like I'm just someone who has a job that they really enjoy every day, but I don't I don't know. I don't really think about.
Okay.
It's very hard to like compare myself to then, because like everything is so incremental, and it's like really, maybe it doesn't really sink in. Yeah.
And post-COVID, a lot of things have changed for a lot of businesses. What has been the impact of COVID in the business of Branch?
I mean, it's hard. It's a really interesting thing because some of our customers are deeply affected by this, and others, well, some of customers are not as affected, and some are deeply affected, but some positive, some negative. So I think it's been an interesting way to find empathy for people who have been deeply affected negatively, and working with those who are seeing a lot of growth to support them during their growth. So it's not that so much has changed, it's more like how we focus our time, how we focus on our customers, the type of companies we go and try to convince to use Branch. There had to be a lot of change, but I think it's going okay.
And this COVID situation has, in a way, forced everybody to become a remote organizations. So you mentioned, so how do you build a culture in a remote organization?
Oh man, it's like hard. I think everyone's trying to figure this out, trying so many things. I think in general, people are very productive, but I feel like the overall productivity, it's harder to work as a cohesive group. And yeah, it's been really hard. I think we will figure it out, but we're not quite there yet.
Awesome.
I think it's still a work in progress. If you have any good ideas. we've implemented a bunch of stuff that other people have. We have a catch-up day with no meetings and things like that, and that came from actually a podcast. And we're just trying, but I think it's going to be hard, not just for us, for others as well.
Yep. And Mada, you've been very vocal about building gender diversity and inclusion within the organization. So what are the initiatives you've taken up at Branch, and as a whole, what would you recommend others who are trying to do that?
I mean, we started having very, very high level goals around DEI, and one of the things we're starting to implement is this idea that you can't hire someone unless you show that the pipeline for that person was at least 50% women and minorities. When we do our sourcing, we try to go after a lot of women, minorities, and then when it comes to like retaining people, I think we've hired consulting companies to understand what we can do better. We've changed a lot of policies as we started getting feedback. We try to do we have a lot of ERGs, employee resource groups. Mm-hmm. I'm the executive sponsor for the women one, but we have, Roots, which is Black professionals. We have one for people of Latino descent. And so I think this obviously depends by country. I think we've tried very hard to build, like, we have an LGBTQ one. So this idea that, like, we have a question in our employee engagement survey that says, I belong at Branch. And I remember we were just presenting the results of the engagement survey last night, and we had a very high, I think it was like something like 80 something, high 80% favorable. And then the rest was neutral, and maybe there was like 1% negative. And I remember thinking, wow, like my goal would be that this is 100%. Like I want, even if it's like 1% of people feel they don't belong at Branch, it's not like I want every single person to feel like they belong. And I don't think that's ever going to be something that even if, let's say, we get to a point in time where everyone feels that they belong, then you keep hiring people. So it's always going to be a work in progress to get better at diversity, of inclusion, and making sure that everyone feels like this is a place for them and they have equal opportunities as everyone else. And our scores are very high, but there is a small percentage of people. And I think trying to understand how we can make sure that every single person feels that they belong and they're included, I think that's one of my goals.
Yeah. And as a founder, you keep getting advices from a lot of people. But what is that one particular advice that has stayed with you and that has helped you?
I mean, I kind of mentioned some of them, right? Like the fact that I can build something, just like find something and do it. I don't know if there's like, the advice that Alex always gives people, and I think it's really good. I stole it. Is this idea that, like, just don't worry about failure, just keep on building. And I feel like that's kind of how I feel like, that's how I feel sometimes. Like sometimes I just fail a lot and I get so nervous. And I think what has been really cool is this idea that I can just keep on going and just keep on building. And one day, even if it's like something fails, like I'll hit something that works. And that's what happened in Branch, but that's what happened many times. Like we tried so many things in marketing. We talked about the things that work, but how about like hackathons? We thought going to hackathons would work. I spent like probably 7 weekends going to hackathons and promoting Branch, and nothing came out of it. And people don't talk about the failures. People don't ask about the failures, right? It's like you only see the things that have worked, but how about all the other things that blood, sweat, and tears into things that didn't work?
Correct.
So don't let those things bring you down. Just keep on building.
And it's interesting, like all 4 of you, like you initially worked on that dog business idea. Now all of you are much more resourceful. Do you get that temptation to, like probably as a side project, start that idea or enable somebody who's trying to do that? Do that kind of a thought comes across?
What do you mean?
The first business that you mentioned about the dog one.
Yeah.
Now all 4 of you are much more resourceful, more successful. you get the temptation that revisit that and just make that idea come alive, or do you get?
Oh man, like, that wasn't a good. I mean, someone else built that, but I still haven't bought it for my dog. So, um, I'm not very good at building. I was thinking of starting my book, my monster book on the side. I just can't. Like, I get so, when I do one thing, that is my everything. So I feel like after Branch, I would build a book and it would be amazing. But that would be the only thing I do. Like, I can't, I'm not the type of person that does multiple things. Like, I can barely, I don't even have a personal life outside of Branch. Branch is all encompassing. I got a dog, so now I have to do other things. But, I was on a call right before this and I was walking Alma, but I was on a work call. So
awesome. Mada, thank you so much for spending your 1 hour with us. Sometimes ending these calls is a very tricky business. So typically what we try to do is that think of this as a university class, and now there is a convocation time and you are a speaker at a convocation and your one-line message to the founders, and the moment you finish that call, I'll end the call. So we'll end on a high. Yes.
Wow, this is intense. Okay. So I will say that the most important thing as a founder, I believe, is grit. And to actually, I think anyone can build a successful company. It would be easier for some than other because luck is a factor, but every single one of you can do it. So the only thing you need is to just keep on going, keep on building, because you will eventually hit that amazing thing that will make you a great founder. Just stick to it, stick to the grit, and you will get there.
Yep. Thank you so much, Mada, for your time and all the support. I'll end this call and I'll share the recording.